Hello, everyone. We still have some people logging in, so we'll give them just a minute to get settled and then we'll get started. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Link Center today for this shared learning group focused on the topic of navigating the criminal legal system. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items while we get started. The session will be recorded. The recording and the transcript will be made available on our website. And we welcome you to visit the website and revisit the content yourself and share it with others. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. Please use the chat function in Zoom to communicate with other attendees and the host during the webinar. You can use the chat by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. Be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you make a comment, and you can change your display name by clicking on those three little dots next to your name and selecting rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately to the host and panelists, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We have live captioning and ASL interpreters present today. We will be spotlighting the active speaker and the ASL interpreter throughout the webinar. If you click on View on your Zoom screen, you can change how you see the panelists. And if you're having any trouble with your view, you can let us know in the Q&A and we'll try to help you out. So at this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Stacy Nonamaker, who's going to get us started. Stacy, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much, Stephanie. As Stephanie mentioned, I'm Stacy Nonamaker. I am with the National Association of State DD Directors, one of the partners of the Link Center. Thanks so much for joining us today. By way of a physical description, I am a middle-aged white woman with dirty blonde hair, straight, wearing a purple shirt, cream color sweater, sitting in front of a white background, wearing glasses. We are very excited to host today's shared learning group. The Link Center is a grant funded by the Administration for Community Living. A few more ground setting things before we jump into our topic of navigating the criminal legal system today. First and foremost, if you don't know about the Link Center, please jump up on our website. You can use the link here or the QR code. And if you do know about the Link Center, please check out the website. We are updating this website with resources and information on a regular basis now. We are almost a year, just a few months shy of a year of having our website up and running, and we're very proud of the information and resources that we are able to put up here as we seek to support people in our communities to better support individuals who have co-occurring conditions. So check it out, check back often. We have a lot of information that we are sharing. And really, these shared learning groups are ways that we continue to expand what we have on the website and what we're learning here at the Link Center. Just a little bit about what shared learning groups are. They are one of the offerings that we have at the Link Center. We host 4 quarterly meetings, topical. And the meetings are tailored to audiences. So earlier today, we had a meeting with targeted for direct support professionals. This meeting is targeted for clinical professionals. And then tomorrow, we'll be talking to people with lived experience and families of people with lived experience. Primarily, the information in all 4 of the presentations are the same. is the same, and we do change or tailor some of the information, particularly discussion questions for each group. We really look at the shared learning groups as a collaboration among the Link Center partners, and those partners include people with lived experience, researchers, and people who work on policy issues, and you'll meet quite a few of the partners representatives today. We do record and transcribe all shared learning groups, and we will make those materials available on our website after the meetings. And we do encourage you, as people who are interested in doing this work and thinking about some of the same things we're thinking about, to share this information far and wide. So today we have a pretty packed time together. If you haven't already, please say hi in the chat, introduce yourself, maybe put your name, perhaps what state you're from, group, association, membership, anything about you in the chat. It's always nice to know who's joining us. And as Stephanie and I have already said, we're going to talk today about navigating the criminal legal system. And we'll start by setting a foundation about why we are talking about this topic and why it's important to this conversation when we talk about how to better support people with co-occurring conditions. We will share resources, trainings, information that the partners here at the Link Center have identified as we started thinking about this topic. And then we'll do a group exercise with you all. And we'll present a scenario and just really get a sense from you what your experience is related to this topic and the scenario that we present, and really help us understand how you're thinking about navigating the criminal legal system. We have a few goals and outcomes for the shared learning groups. Again, we're going to share what we're doing at the Link Center around navigating the criminal legal system. We're going to share resources and information so that you will not only learn about the importance of talking about this topic, but you will also know where to find some resources to better your role in helping someone navigate the criminal legal system. We will learn what you think about supporting someone to navigate the criminal legal system. And that really is the shared part of the shared learning group. So again, it's really important for us at the Link Center to understand your experiences, what you're thinking about, resources that you may have on hand, so we can elevate some of those things to our website so that we can share them more widely, and so that we can also understand what are some gaps or needs related to this topic that we at the Link Center could take for action. And then you will help us come up with ways, again, to solve some example situations, again, as part of the shared learning group, so that we really have a sense of some things that we may need to be thinking about differently at the Link Center, or may need to come together and think about how we can build capacity more widely, and or incite some systems change to increase access to mental health supports for people with IDD, brain injury, and other disabilities. Here at the Link Center, all of our work is guided by a steering committee. The steering committee is comprised of 14 people across the nation with very lived experience, and they very much inform the content of the shared learning groups, in addition to everything else that we do at the Link Center. And the steering committee developed these sharing lived experience slides that we present at the beginning of every shared learning group, just to really give us a basis from which to work, and some agreements from which to really have this meeting today. So this meeting, we'll be talking about people involved in the criminal legal system. And we know around that topic that some people may have experienced trauma that makes it hard to recover and move forward. So we encourage you all to take care of yourself, do what is necessary for your comfort and care. We emphasize that you should be gentle with yourself and each other because this is hard work to do. We acknowledge and celebrate that we are all individuals from different backgrounds. We celebrate that we have shared experiences to learn from. We know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. And then finally, and most importantly to us, in this shared learning environment, we listen and share with open minds and kindness, and we do not judge or blame others for what they share. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, and you're going to see this again at the end, because as I said, we really want to know from you all in your role in the work that you do around this topic of navigating the criminal legal system. What are some of your go-to resources, trainings, websites, just places that you're getting information? So if anything comes to mind now, pop that in the chat. Or if anything comes to mind as we go through the content, please pop those in the chat. Again, here at the Link Center, we're looking to elevate all of that information so that's in one place, to really be a national hub, if you will, for resources and information. So together we can better support people with co-occurring conditions. So I am so very excited to introduce you all to my colleagues from the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, who will be talking more about today's topic. And that's Judy Detmer, Maria Crowley, and Zeta Ricker. And I will turn it over to Zeta to continue with today's content. Thanks so much, Zeta.
Thank you, Stacy and Stephanie, for kicking things off for us today. And hello to each of you. We're really grateful that you were able to join us today to talk about navigating the criminal legal system. My name is Zeta Ricker. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Policy for the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. And I am joined by my colleagues, Judy Detmer, our Director of Technical Assistance, and Maria Crowley, our Director of Professional Development. And NASHA is a nonprofit organization that is made up of the state brain injury program leads and their partners within each state. And we have a strong focus on the criminal legal system, given the high prevalence of people with brain injury within the system, which we'll talk about some today. And we are a proud partner of the Link Center. Before we really dig into today's conversation, just another reminder to please take care of yourself today. The topics in this presentation might be upsetting or hard for some people because they cover sensitive issues about the criminal legal system. It is absolutely okay to step away or take a break if you need to. Your well-being comes first, so please take care of yourself during the session. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all these wonderful resources in the chat. There's some great examples. I encourage you to continue sharing. Before we dive in, want to highlight why we're using the language criminal legal system versus the criminal justice system. And we will use the term criminal legal system. The word justice suggests fairness and equality, which not everyone experiences in the system. In particular, people with disabilities or those from other marginalized communities may not be treated fairly or get justice as we might consider it. And so that's why we say criminal legal system. We want to recognize that these unfair differences exist and highlight the legal rules that cause them. Just want to take a little bit of time to set the stage today and talk about some of the specific challenges that people with disabilities may face, and then we will share some of the data that highlight some of the prevalence within the system. People with disabilities are more likely to be victims of crime. They are more likely to get arrested, more likely to face charges, and spend more time in prison. Once in the criminal legal system, people with disabilities deal with extra challenges, unfair treatment, and may not have access to services, especially services that might best meet their specific needs or address their disability. And all of these things can make it harder to get out of the system. Now I'm going to turn it over to Maria to really talk about some of these specific challenges and the prevalence within the system.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Crowley, NASH's Director for Professional Development, and I have silver wavy hair. I've got a rust-colored shirt and a black and white sweater on, and I have the Link Center background behind me, and we are very proud to be a part of this shared learning group today, and more proud to be one of the Link Center partners. And as Zeta said, I'm just going to jump on into our topic at hand and tell you a little bit about some of the challenges with police. You know, law enforcement has a lot going on, and they may not recognize what they see for what it is often. Police may not recognize some of the signs of brain injury and intellectual and developmental disabilities when they come across someone that they are working with. It happens all the time. Memory problems and communication challenges can certainly be seen as or come across as being uncooperative or dishonest or malingering. That's a word you may have heard. Irritability or impulsiveness, impulse control can be wrongly seen sometimes as aggression. Police may not understand that people with brain injury or intellectual and developmental disabilities sometimes communicate or react in a different way that may lead to unfair treatment. And survivors of trauma, we're going to talk about trauma and trauma-informed practice in the criminal legal system and best practice there. Survivors of trauma, either with brain injury or intellectual and developmental disabilities, may show signs of trauma that officers can misinterpret that may cause further harm. And that may add up to some significant changes. And certainly, as you'll see here, those consequences can be significant and may ultimately lead to people losing their lives. Half of the individuals that police work with that have some kind of disability can die, and we certainly don't want that. So let's make some changes, please, as we go. Some additional data: once individuals are a part of the criminal legal system, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention consider that a public health crisis is comprised of 8.5% of the general population. So certainly 50 to 90% of individuals that have a history of brain injury that are part of the criminal legal system, that's huge compared to 8.5% of the general population. Almost half of youth that are part of the criminal legal system have had some kind of brain injury in the past, and 40% of people that are a part of U.S. prisons have an intellectual and developmental disability. That's really significant. We know that the longer individuals are a part of the criminal legal system, the more likely they are to sustain further brain injury. You're going to hear my colleague Judy Detmer talk about people that are at higher disproportionate risk. That may be women and other groups, people who have had some kind of adverse childhood experience. And we just know that people struggle while they're incarcerated. We're going to talk about that more as we go. We know that mental health, co-occurrence, and IDD Studies reveal that about 1/3 to 1/2 of children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities also have at least, if not more, one mental health condition. And that if you take a look at the research, children with intellectual and developmental disabilities face trauma much more often than children without those disabilities. So, what we know with mental health co-occurrence and brain injury within a justice or criminal legal system environment, you can see the general population there in gray, those little slivers, compared to individuals who have been incarcerated. One group, the general population, no brain injury. The other group there who have sustained a brain injury. Individuals who have had a history of substance use or mental illness, those who have attempted suicide, anyone who's had childhood trauma or adult trauma or school suspensions. Big disparity there with mental health co-occurrence and brain injury. And then when we take a closer look at those who have had no head injury versus a singular event versus more than one brain injury, those challenges worsen with co-occurrence of mental health challenges with each subsequent brain injury. So you can see there no head injury in the blue versus individuals with multiple brain injuries, how much more that impact happens every time a brain injury occurs. And then for people with brain injury and or individual or developmental disabilities, just overall, there's a lack of recognition of people having a disability because it's hidden. People have difficulties getting the right treatment at all. We need increased services while people are in prison, both for physical health and mental health. There are lower rates for completing treatment overall. Disciplinary issues are a factor there. There are more missed court dates, more rule violations due to the challenges that come along with brain injury and IDD. And certainly recidivism happens, higher rates of returning to prison. Because those conditions are hidden, providers or staff just don't know about or don't identify for that disability, and so the right treatment is not being provided. Recidivism increases, the behavior increases, and that combination is not good for the individual or the people providing the services. People struggle while they're incarcerated with recall and attention and impulse control and behavior management. Just with some minimal, intervention, people can be successful and providers can feel successful in helping people be better and not return to that situation. There's a lot of frustration, and with some simple solutions, people can be more successful. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Zeta.
Thank you, Maria. We wanted to make sure that we also addressed that there is intersectionality of some of these challenges. Intersectionality means understanding how different aspects of a person's identity, like race, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, can overlap and combine to create unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. One form of prejudice can amplify another rather than being considered separately. It is very important to highlight the racial disparities of those who have criminal legal system involvement. Black, American Indian, and Latinx people are much more proportionately involved in the criminal legal system compared to their white and Asian counterparts. And given the statistics that Maria just highlighted of those with intellectual and developmental disabilities and brain injury, we know that there are likely many people of color who also have an IDD and or brain injury and co-occurring mental health challenges, and those challenges can compound on one another and make it more difficult throughout their experience within the system, and they are more likely to face bias as a result of that. As we highlighted, people from marginalized racial and ethnic groups are more likely to be involved in the criminal legal system. Black people with IDD and brain injuries are less likely to be diagnosed before they enter prison, so they may not recognize that they have an IDD or brain injury or co-occurring mental health challenges, and that can make it more difficult for them to understand maybe some of the challenges they're experiencing and get the support that they need. Women and transgender people, especially those from racial and ethnic minority groups, are often victims of trauma, and this may not be noticed or dealt with in the criminal legal system. Women and LGBTQ people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or brain injuries may face higher risks of gender-based violence, hate crimes, and exploitation. One group in particular I want to highlight is those who have experienced intimate partner violence, and many people who have experienced intimate partner violence have had a brain injury as a result of that, either from a blow to the head or from strangulation and loss of oxygen to the brain. People with IDD are more likely to face intimate partner violence, and so there's many co-occurring challenges there, and many people who have experienced intimate partner violence also have criminal legal system involvement, which makes it especially challenging to support their needs. And Judy will talk a little bit about the importance of ensuring that there's gender responsive services for folks and trauma-informed care. So it's really important for us to understand how different challenges can overlap and to help everyone get the services they need, regardless of their background or circumstances. While we've highlighted some of the specific challenges we see, we know that there are some gaps in what we have an understanding of. There's not enough research on people in the criminal legal system with intellectual and developmental disabilities, brain injuries, those who might have both IDD or brain injury, other disabilities, and co-occurring mental health challenges. More resources need to be put into research to improve the quality and quantity of studies, and really would love to see more research on some of the specific interventions that might help to support this population in succeeding, so that they can have better outcomes. So really, just to reiterate some of the things that we've talked about, wanted to share a few things as we go into the next portion of our session, to highlight some shared understanding or shared goals. And as I am reading these, please feel free to add anything that we may have missed so that we are keeping these top of mind throughout the rest of our conversation. Well, people with disabilities often face fear, bias, and lack of resources when involved in the criminal legal system. Professionals may not know enough about disabilities, which can lead to errors like misidentifying a disability, assuming someone is not capable or trustworthy, or pressuring someone into admitting to something they didn't do. These mistakes can lead to wrong placements in institutions or people giving up their rights without realizing it. Individuals with disabilities are valuable and have the right to fair treatment. They should not face discrimination or mistreatment in the criminal legal system. They should have fair access to services and programs, and everyone with a disability deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, no matter their involvement in the criminal legal system or other personal traits. Well, again, feel free if there's things that we've missed here as we continue our conversation, we encourage you to add some of our shared understanding as we go into sharing some of the ways that we think we could help to support improvement in the system. Also want to share in listing these things off that it's important to us that we have systemic change and that we're focusing on making change along different pathways rather than putting the onus on people with lived experience to do that themselves, that there's some systemic opportunities for improvement. As we think about some of the challenges here, some additional resources to some of the great resources that you shared in the chat from some of our partners of the Link Center and others who we think do a great job, especially on highlighting some of the challenges. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Judy to introduce a video of someone with lived experience and sharing their story.
Thanks, Zeta. Get my camera on here. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Judy Detmer, as Zeta mentioned. I'm Director for Technical Assistance at the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. And we are glad to be a Link Center partner. I have short hair. I am wearing a white sweater and I have glasses and the Link Center background behind me. So I wanted to start off with this video of a person that I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last couple of years, who is going to share her experience, both as a person with lived experience of brain injury and other disabilities, as well as someone who's been engaged in the criminal legal system. So Stacy, if you could start the video for me, that'd be great.
Bear with me just a minute.
Sharing your story. I'm just really feeling honored that you're taking the time to do this and share your personal perspective on this issue. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. I wanted to ask you, can you share a little bit about your brain injury?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me today. My life was dramatically altered by the consequences of experiencing severe emotional distress and sustaining multiple traumatic brain injuries. Unable to cope in healthy ways with personal challenges, I endured multiple head injuries, each resulting in significant periods of unconsciousness. These physical traumas, compounded by the existing burden of having a learning disorder, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression, severely impacted my emotional regulation. The result was a cascade of negative changes. I became easily agitated and hypervigilant, struggling to control my emotions. Anger became a dominant force, hindering my ability to communicate effectively and advocate for myself. Lacking knowledge about my condition and the appropriate coping mechanisms, I felt lost and overwhelmed.
Michael, I know you, have known you for a while, but I didn't know all that you have experienced. So I've always been impressed by who you are as a person. Your experiences definitely shape who you are, and I'm more impressed even now hearing more about your life. So thank you for sharing all that with us. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the criminal legal system?
Well, I deeply respect the work of law enforcement officers. My experience with the criminal legal system was profoundly negative. I've endured physical injuries and sustained significant emotional trauma including a deep-seated fear of law enforcement. I believe that by working together, we can improve the system. This could include mandatory training on mental health and de-escalation techniques for officers, as well as increased access to mental health resources for individuals in contact with the law. I am very grateful to see that these changes are beginning to be implemented in the state that I live in.
And that's a great deal in part to you. I know that you're a strong advocate, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done in your state, but also nationally, because this is going to be a national video. And I think that people hearing your message will be inspired to make some change as well. Can you talk a little bit about how your brain injury has made these experiences more challenging for you?
Having sustained multiple traumatic brain injuries during a period of intense personal and emotional distress profoundly impacted my ability to navigate the criminal legal system. My emotional regulation was severely compromised, making it incredibly difficult to remain calm and communicate effectively in stressful situations. Unfortunately, encounters with law enforcement officers who lack training in de-escalation techniques often escalated, leading to arrests that might otherwise been avoided.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Can you talk a little bit from your perspective? What do you wish could have been different in your experiences with law enforcement?
It's difficult to say what I wish could have been different. In an ideal world, I would have encountered a system that recognized and responded to the unique challenges I faced. A system where law enforcement and court personnel were trained to understand and de escalate situations involving individuals with brain injury, learning disabilities, mental health conditions. Instead, I experienced repeated arrests, leading to a criminal record that has significantly impacted my life. However, I also believe that these experiences, while incredibly difficult, have motivated me to advocate for change and to improve the system for others facing similar challenges.
Okay. Well, I really am so grateful
Hi,
to
Michael.
Michael. Oops, sorry. There we go. Thank you so much. I am really grateful to Michael for being vulnerable enough to share her story, because it is an important story that highlights a lot of what we're talking about today. And I really do believe that we can make some impact and make some changes to help improve the system for people with disabilities and behavioral health. So that leads me to the next part of our presentation, which is really the now what. You've heard a lot about what the issues are, what some of the gaps are. I get to talk about what some of the solutions might be. So I'm going to jump into that. So a lot of you might be familiar with this. This is the sequential intercept model that was developed by Policy Research Associates through the Samhsa's Gaines Center. It is such a great framework for us to think about how do we engage with the criminal legal system. As you can see, it lays out kind of where those points of intercept are. And it's just a way for us to think systemically, how can we make change, but also for each individual that we are working with. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what some of the areas of change could be within each of those intercepts. So if we're thinking about intercept 1, and actually this could go somewhat to intercept 0, which is more that phase of crisis before engagement with law enforcement. But with intercept 1, it's really a lot of it is about training. And I know that training can be frustrating and sometimes feels like, are we making a difference? But it is a necessary component, and it does eventually make a difference when people are exposed to training about special populations and how to respond. And so that's what we're looking at when we think about intercept 1. And the other piece is to think about co-respondent models and how can we support those in our communities, but also helping follow up with people after crisis or after that initial engagement, and especially those who are frequently seeking services and support through the crisis intervention model and law enforcement interactions. When we think about intercepts 2 and 3, now we're escalating up the system. We're talking about kind of that initial detention or first court appearance. This is where screening really comes into play. So a lot of what Maria and Zeta were talking about is that oftentimes disability and behavioral health is not visible, it's not known when someone enters into the criminal legal system. And so it is important that we do screening to understand if a person is struggling with a disability or behavioral health concern that we might need to provide supports related to. So that's where we start seeing the need to do that screening. Sharing information, our criminal legal system is very siloed. It's very challenging to share information across the different intercepts, but it is an important task to take on if we can think about improving the system. And then intercept 3, there are a variety of treatment courts or specialty courts. People call them different things in different states for people with high risk or need, and people with disability fit into that category, as do people with behavioral health conditions. And so in terms of a good place to think about, again, screening and support, treatment courts are a really good opportunity for us. Same with any of the healthcare services that are offered in jail. And then just a special shout out to the Veterans Justice Outreach Specialists, because there are a lot of veteran courts across the country, and the Veteran Justice Outreach Specialists are people you should get to know if you're serving people with who are veterans. So when we get into intercepts 4 and 5, now we are at that point of reentry and back into community, parole, and probation. And so a big focus is to think about how do we plan for a smooth transition from jail. And a part of that is to do in-reach. So as we think about being clinicians, service providers, people who work with people with disabilities, as much as possible, if you can get into the setting prior to their release, or at least engage with their probation or parole prior to them being released from supervision, we're going to have a much better chance of actually connecting to these individuals versus if we wait for them to come to us or we reach out to them after their release, we probably have lost them. And so thinking about how to help modify or change supervision and getting people connected to the right supports in the community, medications for substance use, how do we ensure that those prescriptions are accessible once they're released and that there's not a gap. The 1115 re-entry waivers are a good step toward that direction. We want to make sure there's not those gaps in supports. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it is important when we are engaging different systems to understand the language of that system. And this is an example of that. So when we talk about the criminal legal system, risk, need, responsivity, the R&R model, is the framework that they use to support people as they move through the criminal legal system. So in this model, risk stands for the risk to reoffend. And then need is what to address. What are those dynamic changing factors that we can address to lower the risk to reoffend? And responsivity can be how are we doing that? What are the systemic changes we're making? But also what are those specific changes we're making to ensure people who are screened at high risk are able to succeed and not recidivate? Just a note on kind of risk. One thing to know is that people with disability are automatically set up to screen a little higher on risk oftentimes, just because the nature of those risk screens and the questions that they ask, such as social engagement, employment, different things that people struggle with after disability and behavioral health. those are baked into the questions. And so we do see that people with disabilities screen higher risk, which is good and bad in some ways. The negative part of that is we don't want to kind of channel people into greater levels of supervision when maybe what they need are more of those accommodations or supports so that they don't recidivate versus a higher level of supervision. So that's just a systemic thing we might need to look at working on. So this is a graphic that depicts this. We see people with disability and mental health concerns can have that increased agitation, increased depression or irritability. And then in turn, they have a decrease in self-regulation, planning, organization, judgment, reasoning, and problem solving. All of those things are those risks that I'm talking about for reoffending. And so what we want to do is be sure we're flipping this paradigm by providing those supports so we can see an increase in all those things on the right side: self-regulation, planning, organization, judgment, reasoning, and problem solving, and then give them the support to decrease agitation, depression, and irritability. So how do we do this? I mean, I think that's the big question, is what supports can be provided for people? Well, as we've been talking about, screening and identification really is the first level of support. We have to know that someone actually has a disability or is struggling with behavioral health conditions that need support. And then beyond understanding that, we need to put into place accommodations and then helping connect to community support. So upon release or ending of supervision, that they can have a network of support to keep them out of the setting. So as we said, people go unnoticed or undiagnosed. I mean, oftentimes when people come into the criminal legal system, there's no note that they even have a disability or some other issue. Especially with brain injury, we find this, the person themselves may not be aware that they had a brain injury. So that's where screening becomes an important factor so that they can understand what's going on with them, understanding why they're struggling. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to understand a history of disability or injury, but it's equally or more important to understand what is it that they're struggling with so that we can then really give them the support that they need so that they can be successful moving through the criminal legal system. And as we've already said, but it's worth repeating, people with disabilities and mental health challenges are more likely to get involved with the criminal legal system than others. And that can include being arrested, charged, jailed, or serving longer sentences. And so, as I mentioned, screening for current needs, most of the screening tools that you'll see for disability will not talk about needs. And the reason we care, again, is that we want to be able to make those adjustments. Some of this can fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, in terms of making those adjustments. Other things are more simply adjusted, and we look at compensatory strategies to help someone. The other big piece of this is to help the person themselves be able to better speak up for themselves so they understand why they're struggling. They have the language around that. They know what they need for supports and they can advocate for themselves. There are different screening tools out there. It's best if those tools are evidence-based. It's also good if they're easy to administer, if they're free or low cost. And thank you, Stacy, for putting those resources in the chat. I think it's really important to understand and respect that when we talk the criminal legal system, we are talking about an overburdened system. And so we want to make the strategies and the tools that we provide feasible for them to be able to administer based on their resources, both time and cost. I want to make a specific note about trauma-informed screening. As was mentioned earlier, people with disabilities, those who are women in the justice system often have already experienced a great deal of trauma. And so the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado put together some tips around trauma-informed screening so we can set the stage for success when we start screening. And parts of that, I'll just call out these bullets, but you want to start by giving the client an overview of the questions they'll ask before or during the screening so that they know what to expect. You want to let them know that they only need to share information that helps identify any disability or mental health issue, and they do not need to share anything they're not comfortable with. You want to explain that after the screening, the results will be discussed, that it's really for them in addition for us to better understand how to work with them. And that's the last bullet, is really understanding that we're using this information so that we can help improve their outcomes. When you think about screening, so the different audiences for this shared learning group, clinical professionals, this is where there's a good opportunity for you all to be able to integrate screening into your practice. So if you are working with somebody that you know has been engaged in the criminal legal system or is currently engaged in the criminal legal system, those are very good candidates to screen for brain injury or other disabilities, because we know that that prevalence rate is so high. Also, if you're working in a criminal legal setting, it would be very good to screen for brain injury. Same direct support professionals, what we're looking for them to do is advocate for screening and identifying challenges for the criminal legal staff as appropriate so that they can again provide some supports and accommodations. And then when we talk about family members and people with lived experience, we want to encourage advocacy for screening and identifying challenge. The family members can help identify challenges as well as the person with lived experience can do that same.
Judy, quickly before we move on, I'm hoping that you might be able to share some ways that state folks could integrate screening. And looking at a lot of the folks who are on the line, I saw some brain injury and DD and justice professional state folks. Would love your thoughts on how they could integrate screening.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that you guys are in a great position to influence screening for disability. A big piece of that is thinking about kind of that systems change. And at a state level, you have that opportunity. So when you think about that sequential intercept model that I shared earlier, again, there's various points along the intercept model that you can help advocate for and educate on why screening is important. So I just want to, I'll kind of touch on these a little bit, but law enforcement or intercept 0 or 1, screening is not going to be really feasible. A law enforcement officer in the moment is not going to be able to use a screening tool in that way. But instead, what you can do is help educate them about how to recognize the signs of disability. We do that with brain injury, like what to look for, what are you seeing that might be brain injury. And also to maybe think about universally approaching people as if they have a disability or behavioral health condition so that we can help, as Michael mentioned in her video, de-escalate versus escalate people. The other parts of the intercept model lend themselves better to being able to do more formal screening, because anybody who has more time with the individual can do the screening. Most of the screening instruments are brief, but it will give them a better opportunity to understand, does the person have a disability and what are the challenges they're currently facing so that they can then adjust how they support that person. I think you as state agencies or state people are really in the position to advocate to provide that education to the criminal legal system, as well as make policy changes and some of the other things if you can take it that far. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the so what. As I mentioned, we don't want to screen just for screening's sake. The point is to get people the support that they need. But this scares people, especially criminal legal system, where they think, what can I do about this? What can I do about brain injury? What can I do about disability? And I think the important message is to say, you're not treating brain injury. What you're really doing is supporting the person in the context that they have a disability or a behavioral health condition so that you can mitigate the consequences that they're facing from those disabilities. It really helps to kind of demystify disability and mental health for non-professionals, helps them think about, I have the capability, the power to support someone with a disability or mental health condition. And importantly, it helps empower people with disabilities in terms of understanding what they need and be able to speak up for what they need and advocate for themselves. Same for family members. One thing that we really stress, this happens a lot when we work in criminal legal systems and other systems, but since we're talking about the criminal legal system today, I'll focus on that, is that they have power to do things within the system. What we tend to see is that, oh, they have a brain injury, I need to refer them to somebody. That's ideal if there are specialists that you can refer somebody to. And that's in addition to what you can do internally within the criminal legal system. And I'll talk about some of those basic strategies that can be used. And hopefully they would feel empowered to be able to implement change. So when we talk about strategies, we're talking kind of universal design. These tips are helpful for everyone, what I'll talk about next, not just people with disabilities or behavioral health conditions. It really is anybody going into a criminal legal system. It is overwhelming no matter if you have a disability or something else going on. So everybody can benefit from this. However, what's critical to understand is that they're vital for people with intellectual developmental disability, brain injury, and co-occurring mental health challenges. Without these adjustments and supports, they're going to continue to fail and recidivate at higher rates than their peers. So what am I talking about? I think the main thing is to kind of be observant. What are we seeing from people? And so when we think about people who have language issues, they may not be able to interpret body language. They may make inappropriate eye contact. They may get in your space, not respect your bubble. They may say too much or too little. They may not have awareness of their behavior. Oftentimes people will say, huh, a lot, or they just look confused, like they're not following. And then people with disabilities tend to be followers, so they can find themselves in situations that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have. And then the last piece is that oftentimes people struggle with sarcasm and abstract language and thoughts. They may also be withdrawn. They may have poor grammar, so it might be difficult to get their point across. They may be difficult to follow in a conversation. They may struggle to stay on topic, and they may have difficulties navigating social roles. So when you think about what this looks like, oftentimes people with disabilities will be judged as being non-compliant or non-compliant, I guess I'll just use, or having a behavioral issue, when in reality, it might be that they have a skill deficit in which they can't understand what you're saying and comply with what you need them to do. So these are examples of really basic compensatory strategies, and why I say within the system, you have the power if you're in a criminal legal system, even if you're not a professional that understands mental health or brain injury or disability. These are things we can all do to help people have better success. So for example, just be direct. Don't use abstract language, metaphors, etc. Allow for wait time for a response. A lot of times things move very quickly and the person is still processing what it is you're asking them to do. Providing those instructions slowly and one at a time versus multiple instructions at a time. Asking the person if it'd be helpful to repeat or rephrase your message. Ensure that they comprehend what you're saying. Let the individual know that you value their input. People in the criminal legal system are devalued from the moment that they step foot in that system. People with disabilities and behavioral health are devalued even before they get to a criminal legal setting. And so just that little bit of respect can go a long way to get someone to be able to work with you a little better.
Judy, just
The final
quickly-
piece to support that we talked about is connections to community services. So if you are a community provider versus a criminal legal person, reach out to your criminal legal partners and let them know you're out there. Let them know that you can provide support to people. And as criminal legal entities, it'd be helpful for you to reach out to your community to see who's available to maybe provide support. This is something that Zeta mentioned early on, but we want to make sure that the unique needs of specialty populations are taken into consideration. So we want to be thinking, are services gender responsive? Are they easy to access and flexible? We want to be sure that people understand and have access to victim advocacy services as needed. That services should also be culturally responsive and to historically marginalized groups such as BIPOC, LGBTQIA+ communities who tend to be overrepresented in the system. If you were not part of the October shared learning group, I would highly suggest watching that. I watched it recently. I learned a great deal, and I think it could help really inform your practice to be more responsive. Another piece is ensuring, and this is again in a state level where we can try to make policy changes or program changes, but ensuring that there are targeted case management supports. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth mentioning again. We want to be sure that people, that we're reaching into the system before someone leaves. We want to be sure that we're connecting, building that relationship, building that trust prior to when someone's leaving the system so that there's better follow through. And case management can be a key to that. The case management needs to be intensive to help people access appropriate services and involve directly assisting the individual with applications, appointments, problem solving, and advocacy. Assuming that they have that ability to do that on their own is probably not the best assumption. So in terms of the specific audiences, how can you ensure connection to community services? Again, you all are in the clinical professional group right now, but we can support people in accessing additional appropriate services or connecting to case management services. So being aware of what's out there. Direct support professionals can provide support with accessing or providing targeted case management to connect to resources. And family members can be thinking about advocating for connection to community supports. And people with lived experience can work towards systemic change, self-advocacy, and may be important to ensure that they receive the appropriate services. So everybody has a role to play. All right. With that, I am going to turn it over to Wendy and Matt to go ahead and Max, I'm sorry, to do our group exercise.
Well, thank you very much for turning it over to us. So I'm Max Barrows. I am wearing a black tie with a white dress shirt with blue stripes, and I am a black man with black hair, with black headphones on a white background, and I live here in Vermont, and I'm a person on the autism spectrum, and I work for Green Mountain Self Advocates. So I am going to take you through an exercise with a scenario where I will present one to you that talks about navigating the criminal and legal system. And what we hope is that we hear from you about how you think about this topic that through this discussion around the scenario. There is no wrong answer and ideas, because we believe you are the experts of your own experiences, and we want to hear from you. The Link Center wants to know what you are thinking, so we can, elevate things you bring up that we haven't thought about, and so we can take action on some things as well. So what you can do is you can raise your hand to come off mute and even come on camera if you want. You can write your thoughts in the chat, or you can email us and we will put our email in the chat for you. And remember, if you need to step away or take a minute to regulate and calm, please do so. So on that note, here we go. So here is the scenario. Malik is a 17-year-old male with IDD and a history of depression. He was placed in a juvenile detention facility where he had trouble understanding the rules, following staff instructions, and was quickly labeled as non-compliant. His disability and mental health needs were not considered in his care, and he risks being sent to a long-term juvenile detention facility instead of getting the support he needs. So here are the questions that we would like to ask to hear from you about this scenario. And I'm going to go through one at a time. First, what steps can you take to ensure Malik's needs are understood and addressed by the criminal legal system?
And Max, while we're waiting for folks to start putting stuff in the chat, I'll just quickly introduce myself as well. So I'm Wendy Morris. I am with the National Association for State Mental Health Program Directors, or NASHPD. I'm a white, middle-aged white woman with long gray hair, and I'm wearing a tan turtleneck today and glasses. So happy to be here and work with Max on this section today.
So again, what steps can you take to ensure Malik's needs are understood and addressed by the criminal legal system?
All right, so it says, Janet says, get Malik's guardian or parents' permission, his guardians or parents' permission to talk with the criminal legal system, and that education would be key. That's a good point. Education is important. And Stephanie's just again reminding folks that they're welcome to unmute. You can request to unmute, raise your hand, or use your microphone at this time. So you don't just have to use the chat, right? I think Max ran through some different options of ways you can participate.
Mm-hmm.
This is Judy. Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I wanted to put in a plug for the first step being screening to understand if they have a disability, brain injury, or co-occurring behavioral health issue. So this is a good place to think about doing that, along with, I think education is extremely important.
Yeah. And then Deborah Pinel says, sometimes it's helpful for family or support to create a card with information. And I think, Max, didn't you all create a resource about how, maybe a little bit about using cards or communication cards?
I can't remember off
It
the
might have been
top of
another
my
one of
head.
the partners, but I think it was on our last batch of resources, so hopefully that'll go up soon. Okay, now comments are coming in. So Janet says, gather a treatment team to discuss his situation / needs and work together with the criminal legal system to come up with interventions and options. Yeah, so working again with the system. Carly says programs like Blue Envelope Program help to inform officers or emergency personnel that someone has intellectual developmental disability or communication needs.
Mhm.
Do you want to grab the next one?
Question?
No, I can keep reading. So Anastasia
Oh, I'm
says,
sorry.
you're fine. Advocate for appropriate screening to be done. Connect with local National Disability Rights Office. Perhaps link Malik with a certified peer specialist to support him during this very stressful time. That's a great idea.
Okay, I could take this one
Sure.
right here. I see where you are now. Stephanie Hale says request medical mental health records. Take to probation officers if they have been any previous interactions with criminal legal system. Obtain high school records, guidance counselor notes on school behaviors.
Yep. And then the next comment says there's a need for Malik to be diagnosed by an appropriate provider, which will allow his diagnosis to be legally recognized in the legal system. Yeah, I guess that's a good point, right? We got to make sure we're all speaking the same language, so the legal system understands what we're trying to.
I got one from Lisa Bayer says, inform the legal system of his situation, contact family to assist with advocacy for Malik, get a evaluation completed. There are community mental health laws, maybe some education to the legal system on this would be needed. Get support through mental health system. Gather as much information as possible to present the legal system.
And then Maria asks, what can Malik do to self-advocate? Good point. Great.
So I think we could go on to the next question. And the next question is, how would you advocate for Malik to get the right evaluation?
Yeah, great.
How would you advocate for Malik to get the right evaluation?
Perry says, I would possibly have a training with staff about making sure to use simple instructions without lots of steps for all juveniles. In addition, screen Malik for intellectual developmental disability and traumatic brain injury, as well as PHQ-9. Brief staff on results and teach them how to work with him more effectively.
I think there was another person, and maybe this could be the previous question.
It was,
And
it came
it
out while
says,
you were reading it.
self-advocate, share permission for all team members to collaborate on his behalf. That's good.
Mm-hmm. And then when he says, I would reach out to the specialists with traumatic brain injury and intellectual developmental disability to obtain a thorough assessment. So reaching out to the specialists.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else on this question before I move to the next? I got one from Lisa Bayer saying, discuss evaluation with Malik and how it would be beneficial for him. He could get some help he may need.
Yeah, I love how many comments are really framing around self-advocacy and helping Malik
Right.
gain those skills to self-advocate. And then the next comment says, I will advocate for Malik to see a provider to diagnose his disability. So that's come up a few times too. Make sure we're getting an accurate assessment and diagnosis of what's going on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else before I move on to the next question? I don't see anything, so I will move on to the next question. And the next question is, how would you involve, oh, here's another one. Babatu, I'm good. Babatuna, so I've been living in this country too long. Here's what it says. It says, I will advocate for Malik to see provider to diagnose his disability.
And then also a challenge to try to pronounce the name again.
Babatunde Soemimo.
All right. So you read the third question, yes? He said, awesome. There you go.
All right.
A
So
good demonstration of making an effort, right?
okay, I'll read the third question. How would you involve his family, community healthcare providers, or other supportive people to create a plan for his successful reentry?
Yeah, and we have a
Okay,
couple coming in, which I assume are for the third question. So Anastasia says, ensure that Malik's goals and life plans are included. His priorities need to be front and center of a person-centered plan/approach. It's essential, especially as he transitions back to the community. That's great. And then when he says, I would ask Malik who he would like to be involved in his treatment plan and include those people to give their unique perspectives on his needs and abilities. So again, person-centered, asking Malik for input, and not just making decisions without that input. Like
Okay.
Lynn, win like Lynn. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Max,
See if
this is
there's
Judy again, because I just can't seem to keep my mic off, apparently. I did want to comment on a couple of things. One is, when we think about, this is a struggle that I have when working with states sometimes, and I see the benefit to both approaches. But when we think about making systems change, I think it's really important to think what are the resources within the criminal legal system itself that can make those changes. And that's because of sustainability. And I mentioned this earlier, if we go outside of the criminal legal system to always look for that support, someone's got to fund that. People have to have the appropriate insurance, they have to have the ability to access that. So what can we do within the actual criminal legal system with the personnel there to really ensure that sustainability of some of this change? And a few of those things are having them do the screening, having them really do the training and understand how to do the support through the compensatory strategies. So that's just one thing I want to bring up. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is I see a lot about diagnosis, which I do agree is very important, especially when we're talking about legal parameters and accessing supports. That being said, there's also a benefit to doing screening, at least from a clinical standpoint, to understand what is the person struggling with, so that we can be sure to get them the appropriate accommodations while they're within the criminal legal system, even if they can't get that diagnosis while in the system. But there's two different kind of roles for diagnosis and screening, I think. But anyway, just wanted to bring those two things up.
Thank you.
Anything else before we move on? Oh, yes, supporting the functional needs. Okay. Anything else before we move to the last question?
We
Oh,
got one
okay.
more. Yep, by letting them know Malik's strength and preferences and focusing on these areas to encourage his participation. Again, person-centered, involve the individual. Great. So we got just a couple minutes left and one more question.
And that is, how can we hold the system accountable to support Malik appropriately?
And I think we've alluded to that a little bit. Folks have brought up educating the system some, but how would we hold them accountable? And Wynn says coordination between stakeholders is key, unified presentation to legislators to provide adequate funding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Coordination, collaboration are great
Mhm.
ways to hold each other accountable.
Yep.
And then Anastasia says Disability Rights Network, not to sound like a broken record. That's okay. Repetition's good. Dev says working with disability rights to bring cases forward. Great idea. And then this person says, you don't need to mention my name, but I'm just wondering if any of you is familiar with the Bedden-Dassey case, just related on topic. I'm not. I don't know if you are, Max. And then Wynn says regular auditing of services as well as seeking out client satisfaction services. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. This says Brendan Dassey case. I guess maybe we should look that up sometime.
Were you asking me the same question?
No, it's just they put a correction for spelling in the chat, so I'm just gonna write it down.
Okay.
I don't know if one of the other hosts or panelists is familiar with it. If so, maybe just chime in, but we will look into that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Any other chats or comment? Anybody else want to come off mute before we move to closing? Oh,
here's one.
Yep, from Perry. Did you want to read it?
I can. I would try to get Malik a case manager in the community that can help him access specific services. I think we need both. We need people who are well trained within the criminal legal system, and upon reentry, we need to refer to appropriate services, like sending in a referral while he is in the legal system to supportive services. For example, submitting an application for IDD waiver services, and then fast tracking that referral if possible because of legal system involvement. And Zeta says exactly, Perry, totally agree.
Great. Great. So
Anything else?
does he think it's time to turn it over to Carly for closing?
Well, here's another one from Perry Spencer. I believe he'll be way less likely to re-offend if he has supportive services like a care attendant or employment services.
Yeah. Great point, Perry.
All right. Well, I don't think there is anything else coming through. And thank you, some people, for hanging in there while I tried to get the pronunciations of your names right. It's going to take some practices if I run into you once again. On that note, let's turn it over to Carly. Carly, you have the floor for closing.
Thank you. My name is Carly Winnie, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at NAD, an association for people with intellectual developmental disabilities and mental health needs. I am a middle-aged white woman with gray and brown hair. I'm wearing a black sweater, and today I'm wearing glasses. Thank you all so much for being here today and participating in this great discussion. Please continue to add to the chat. What are your go-to resources, training websites, and where you get information and supports that will help us develop the materials and really inform us about where you go for information to navigate the criminal legal system. Slide. Here's the schedule of past and upcoming shared learning groups. You can find recordings, transcripts, and material from past events on the Link Center website. You can find and register for upcoming shared learning groups on the website as well. And the next topic will be developing regulation and coping skills, and that's coming up in April. Slide. You can visit the Link Center's website at any time. The address and link are here on the screen, and we'll drop it in the chat as well. You can also email the Link Center if you have questions or suggestions. Slide. We do have a quick evaluation that we hope you'll complete for us. On the screen is a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and we'll also put the link in the chat as well. It will pop up when we close today and will be sent out to everyone in an email as well. Your feedback on the evaluation really helps us to make improvements and adjustments for future webinars and products. Slide. So thank you again for participating today. We want to say a special thank you to our colleagues at NASHA. We'd like to thank Michael Cook for sharing their thoughts and experience. We also would like to thank members of the Link Center Steering Committee for their time and their valuable input for these shared learning groups. And also thank you to ACL and all of the Link Center partners for contributing to the preparation of and content of this meeting. So that is all for today. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and evening, and thank you so much for taking the time today to participate. We really appreciate it.